All right, so let's jump in and get started. This video is designed to get you comfortable with the Visual Studio environment, as well as we will use it to write our first Hello World application. This is what your screen should look like when you first launch Visual Studio. This is the start page. You can see that I have Enterprise 2015 installed. I'm hoping that you were able to find the same version. That way our examples and things will be consistent as you work through the problems. When you first see the start page, you'll see things like different information on different platforms that Microsoft has. Here is some upcoming news events, or it might be announcements to new products or product updates or that kind of a thing. Featured videos, if you want to, in all your free time, work through some additional training videos that Microsoft is suggesting to you. You'll also see the ability to have this start page come on every time or not open up every time you launch Visual Studio. That's completely up to you. What we're going to do is, from here you can see there's Start a New Project. You could also choose File, New, and Project, and they'll both come up to the same screen. And your screen will look something like this. Now it might look different depending on things that you have installed, second-party applications, third-party applications, that kind of thing, other plugins that you might have installed. But you should have at least Visual C#. Hopefully that'll be available to you. There's other languages here as well, depending on what you've installed. So if I choose C#, and what we're going to be working on is the console application for the moment. The console application is just that blank black screen that has text displayed on it. So we'll select, make sure you have C# selected, and then we're going to choose the console application. This is the name of our project, whatever you want it to be. I'm going to call ours Hello World. Okay. Location, by default, files are stored in Documents Visual Studio 2015 folder. You can click on Browse and choose a different location if you would like. And then our solution name is going to be the same thing that we give it here, which is fine for now. And then if you have this little button clicked in this Visual Studio 2015 folder, there will be another folder created with the solution name. So that's a good one to click to keep your files, your projects separated. So I'm going to choose that and click on OK. And it builds the project, and you should see something that looks like this. So let's begin by looking at the anatomy of the IDE and explore some of the windows that we're being presented with here. This large window that is open here in front of us is the code editor, source editor, and this is where we'll write all of our C# code. You can tell the name of the file by looking at the tab at the top of the window. By default, this file name is program.cs, and all of our text, all of our code contained within this file will be written here in the editor. To the right, you're going to see Solution Explorer. And Solution Explorer is a window that provides us with all of the files and settings and configurations that we need to run our application. The very top is our solution, and our solution is a container that holds all of our files. It's the highest level of our application. Underneath the solution file, you'll see our Hello World project. Now, it is possible to have more than one project in a solution. That's not something we're going to deal with right now, but an example of that might be if you're creating a website, for an example, and you need to create a component for the server and also server-side code, and also a component for the client-side code. But in our case, we just have one project, and that's going to be the Hello World project. You'll also see properties, references, and things that we will get to as we get a little bit more advanced. And further on down, you'll see the program.cs, which again is the file that we're working on here in our source editor at the moment. I'm going to right-click on Solution and go down to Open Folder in File Explorer. And you'll see here that there is a folder called Hello World created in our Documents Visual Studio. We saw that when we first created this application. Here is our hello world.sln or solution file. That's the solution file we saw here in the Solution Explorer. Now the SLN file doesn't contain any code, but it contains a lot of information to Visual Studio on what to put within this solution container, as we talked about. You'll see a folder that says Hello World, so if I double click on that folder, here you'll see these things that pertain to the things that you see in the Solution Explorer. For example, our program.cs. So here's where our CS code file is being held. This is the file that you're going to upload into Hypergrade when we get to that in a minute. Hello world.cs proj file is this folder right here, or this file right here, the Hello World project. So we'll deal with some of these other things as we get more advanced. If you look in your bin directory, that's where you'll see the exe file that runs this application. But again, that's things that we'll deal with as we go along. But that gives you a general overview of where these things that make up our solution are held. Now, if for some reason you don't want to have this window displayed, you can use this little auto hide, the thumbtack, to present it as a little tab on the side. And then I can click on it again to present it and dock it in. If for some reason you accidentally close it, you hit the X and it goes away. I'm just going to delete these since they're here. And now my Solution Explorer is no longer a tab. You can go to View and click on Solution Explorer, and there it will show up again. All right, before we get started, there are a couple of settings you might want to adjust in order to make your experience here a little bit easier. The first thing that you should do is, if not already, you'll want to turn your line numbers on. That way it makes it easy for me to reference lines to look at in our code, and or when you get error messages, you know what line the error message is referring to. So I'm going to come to Tools and Options, and then look for Text Editor. Make sure you click on that little drop-down box under Text Editor. Come to All Languages, and you'll see a little option here, a little box that says line numbers. You're going to want to make sure that that's clicked on. And so that way when you choose OK, you'll see that line numbers are here. So it makes it much easier to say refer to line 11, or when you get error messages, it'll point to line number 15 and you'll know where to look for the error message. The other thing you might want to do is I'll change the size of the code. Maybe this is hard to see or you want it bigger or smaller. If you click on your Control button and scroll your mouse up, you'll get bigger text. If you scroll the mouse down, you'll get smaller text. The other thing you might want to do is you can go into Tools, again to Options, and if you click on Environment and select Fonts and Colors, this gives you the ability to change. Maybe it's easier for you to see if your background color is white. Maybe you like to get creative and you want a purple background or a navy background. You can adjust your font colors and personalize your editor to look the way you want it to do. You want to make it as easy to read as possible for yourself, since you're going to be spending a lot of time staring at this screen. So click on OK and you can see you've made the changes. I'm going to set that back to black. I'm not particularly fond of that particular. So again, Tools, Options, Environment, Fonts and Colors, and I'm going to set that back to the default of black. Okay? Good, so let's get started. All right. So let's look at some of the code that was given to us by default, and you'll learn more about this as we move along. But in the short run, first of all, we're going to have a main, and main is the entry point for any application. So every application that's written is going to have a main, and any code that we want to put on our application, we're going to put in between these open and closed curly brackets. Now in C#, every main has to be contained within a class. And we know that this is a class. First of all, it says class, but there's also all the class names are given a different color, as you can see, and they're also capitalized. All of our classes for this application are going to be contained within a namespace. And a namespace is basically an encapsulation of many classes. In this case, we just have the one class so far, but all of the classes that we are going to want to utilize in this application and that will want to be able to communicate with each other all must be in the same namespace. We've called our namespace, or by default, our namespace was given what we wrote as the name of the project. It doesn't have to be, but in this case, it just makes it more convenient for us. Above that, you'll see using statements. And using statements are us telling the compiler, these are some of the libraries in the .NET framework that we're going to want to be using. And so this is our way of telling the compiler, these are some of the libraries that we want to utilize, and the ones that have been presented to us here by default are ones that are needed for the console application to work or to run. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to write our hello world. So in between these curly braces, notice that my cursor is indenting. That's good programming practice. And we're going to write the word console, meaning we're going to write to our console. And then you'll also notice that as I'm writing or typing, I get this drop down. This is called IntelliSense. And IntelliSense is trying to give us some clues as to what we might want to be using or what is usable with the console dot. So in other words, if I start to continue with console write, I can look down here and see that there's the write line. That's what I was interested in. And as we move along, you'll see that these icons have special meanings to the words or to the text that's beside of it. In other words, it might be a method, it might be a property, and these are things that we'll learn as we go along. Also notice that if I put my mouse over write line, it tries to give me more information about how to use that write line, and we'll get into that as we move along as well. So for the moment, I'm just going to double click on the write line. Now this also makes sure that I spell it correctly and that I capitalize it correctly. So it's a way for us to have clues of what's available to us, and it helps us write code that's relatively error-free as much as possible. Okay, so then I'm going to put a parentheses and a quote, and I'm going to type in hello world. Okay, so if you're new to programming, this is, or you should have gotten it in 120 probably, this is a string, and it's a literal string which says, what I want you to do is write to the console this exact text, hello world. Okay? And then notice afterwards that you see this red squiggly line. This red squiggly line is saying, you're still missing something. The compiler is trying to give you some clues that this isn't quite correct. If I hold my little cursor over, it's expecting a semicolon because all of our sentences, all of our statements should be ending in a semicolon. So that being said, I no longer have the little squiggly red line, and that's a relatively simple error that C# compiler can figure out. Not all of our errors are going to be quite so straightforward. Sometimes it takes us more work to figure it out, but in the short run, that one's pretty simple. You'll notice on the left-hand side that I have yellow bars. The yellow bars indicate changes that were made but weren't saved. And then the green bars represent code that has previously been saved. New to this version of C#, C#5, we can also, and you've read this in the first chapter in the book, add a using statement that says using static, and then I can type in system.console. Notice this red squiggly line, so I'm going to put my semicolon, and by doing that, I don't have to write console down here every time I want to write a line. Now I can simply just use write line because I've used the using statement. I don't have to keep qualifying it, and what qualifying means, if I don't do this, I'm going to delete it for a moment. If I don't do this, now this is you can see the red line, so there's a failure. It doesn't know console is part of the write line, and we'll get into this more into detail, which means I would have to write console here, and then the red squiggly line goes away, and the compiler says, oh, write line, I understand, that's part of the console. So either way you want to do it is fine. I'm going to save this so everything turns green. Okay, so now we want to test to make sure that we don't have any compile errors, that everything is running the way it's supposed to as far as the compiler is concerned. If you click on Build, it's probably running off the screen, but the first option is Control-Shift-B or Build Solution, so either one will work. And you'll see down here that the build was successful. Here's our output window, and this is information from the compiler. This is where errors will show up if we had an error. But this is letting us know that everything's looking fine as far as the compiler is concerned, so we're not getting any compile errors. I'm going to use the little auto hide, the thumbtack, to put it down lower so it's out of our way. Now, if for some reason, for example, I didn't have the semicolon, we know that we get the little curly red line there, but let's build it anyway and see what happens. So if I build the solution or Control-Shift-B, here you can see that the line number comes in handy. So we should have line number 14, that there's an error, and this one's pretty straightforward, expected a semicolon. As I said, sometimes our error messages aren't quite so easy to understand. But now I should be able to click on that. This takes me right to line 14. I can see my error, and I can put in my semicolon. And if I rebuild it again, Control-Shift-B should say everything is good. So all my compile errors are now taken care of. All right, well, how about let's running this program. If you click on, I'm just going to show where it is. You can click on the Start button here, for example. So if I click on Start, it will also do the build and give me some compile errors. So I could, in essence, skip Control-Shift-B if I wanted to. But let's click on Start. Now, notice that there was a screen that flashed and then it went away. That's because the compiler did exactly what we asked it to do. It showed the window, wrote hello world, but then it disappeared before we had a chance to see it. So what we're going to do is add this particular code for the short run. This is a preprocessor directive, and we'll learn a little bit more about that as we go along. But if we're in debug mode, what we're saying is hold on to the window until we get a chance to look at it, and then it'll go away when we click on any key. Notice my little red squiggly line because I don't have the word console. Okay, so console, now I have my read key, my little red squiggly line goes away. You can see there it says class system console in my IntelliSense. So these are starting to give us clues on things that might look familiar. We might not understand all this in the short run, but we're starting to get familiar with it. So again, if I had put using static system.console in my using statements, that red squiggly line wouldn't have been there, and I could have just put in read key. So now let's look and see what happens when we click on our Start or F5, either one. And now we see our Hello World window, and the read key is telling us to wait for something to happen before we get rid of this window. So if I clicked on a key or I clicked on the X, either one, then we get returned back to our program. Seeing our diagnostic tools, which we'll talk about at another time.